My best friend sabotaged my relationship with my boyfriend for fun, and now my entire life has fallen apart as I uncover the shocking truth behind her twisted jealousy. My name is Emily 25F, and I thought I had a best friend I could trust with anything. That person was Chloe 26F. We'd been friends for over a decade, practically sisters. She knew everything about me, my secrets, my insecurities, and especially the relationship I had with my boyfriend Ryan, 27M Ryan, and I have been together for almost 2 years, and things were finally getting serious. I'd even started thinking he might be the one. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, he stopped speaking to me. He blocked my number, ignored my calls, and wouldn't even look at me when I tried to confront him. I had no idea what was happening. At first, I thought maybe he was going through something, that he needed space. But as the days went on, I became more worried. I tried everything to get him to talk to me. I went to his apartment, left voicemails, even tried to reach him through his friends. They all said the same thing. He doesn't want to talk to you. I felt like my world was crumbling. Just a few days before, we'd been happy, making plans for the future. Now, I was completely shut out, with no explanation. It felt like a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. I had to find out what went wrong. I turned to Chloe for support, hoping she could help me make sense of it all. I poured my heart out to her, telling her how devastated I was, how confused. She listened, nodding sympathetically, but there was something in her eyes that didn't sit right with me. She seemed almost amused. I brushed it off, thinking I was just paranoid. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Maybe he's just tired of you," she said, a smirk playing on her lips. "Or maybe he found someone else. Men do that, you know." I felt a pang of anger and hurt. I thought she was my friend. Why was she being so cruel? Days went by, and I was still in the dark. Ryan continued to ignore me, and Chloe started acting more distant. I decided to check my phone records, desperate for any clue that might explain what was happening. That's when I found it. A series of messages sent from my phone to Ryan's, messages I knew I hadn't written. The words were cruel, heartless, telling him things like, "I never loved you, and I'm just using you until someone better comes along." My heart sank as I realized someone had sent these messages from my phone. There was only one person who had access to it, Chloe. I confronted Chloe, my heart pounding as I demanded answers. "Did you send those texts to Ryan?" I asked, holding my phone out as evidence. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she laughed, shrugging as if it were no big deal. "Oh, come on, Em," she said, rolling her eyes. "It was just a prank. You're so uptight sometimes. I thought it would be funny." I stared at her in disbelief, barely able to comprehend her words. "Funny? You ruined my relationship, Chloe. Ryan thinks I betrayed him, and you think this is a joke." She shrugged again, clearly not understanding or caring about the damage she'd done. The anger inside me boiled over, and I lashed out, calling her every name I could think of. She just stood there smirking, like she was enjoying my pain. "You're overreacting," she said, crossing her arms. "If he really loved you, he'd know it was fake. Maybe he wasn't the right guy for you anyway." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Chloe, my best friend, had sabotaged my relationship, and now she was trying to act like she'd done me a favor. I felt a surge of rage, a desire to hurt her the way she'd hurt me. But I held back, knowing it wouldn't solve anything. I needed to fix this with Ryan. I spent hours trying to find a way to contact Ryan, to explain what had happened. But he wouldn't listen. He blocked me on social media, ignored my emails, and even told mutual friends he didn't want anything to do with me. I was heartbroken, shattered by the betrayal of both my boyfriend and my best friend. I couldn't understand why she would do something like this. What had I done to deserve such cruelty? I replayed our conversations, trying to find any sign that Chloe had been jealous, that she'd resented me. But nothing made sense. I felt lost, alone, and completely devastated. Desperate for answers, I reached out to some mutual friends, hoping they could help me understand Chloe's behavior. That's when I started hearing things I'd never expected. One friend told me that Chloe had been talking behind my back for months, telling people I was a terrible girlfriend, that I didn't deserve Ryan. Another friend said she'd seen Chloe flirting with Ryan at a party when I wasn't around. My stomach turned as I realized the extent of her betrayal. She hadn't just sabotaged my relationship. She'd been actively working to ruin it. I felt like a fool for ever trusting her, for letting her into my life. Fueled by a mixture of anger and heartbreak, I decided to confront Chloe one last time. I showed up at her apartment, demanding answers. "Why did you do it, Chloe? Why would you ruin my relationship? I thought you were my friend." She smirked, clearly unbothered by my pain. "You really want to know," she sneered. "I did it because I could. Because it was easy. You've always had everything, Em. The perfect boyfriend, the perfect life. I just wanted to see how it felt to take that away from you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe the venom in her voice, the satisfaction she took in my suffering. I stood there, speechless, as she continued to spew her hatred. "You think you're so perfect, Emily. You've always acted like you're better than me, like you're the star of the show. Well, guess what? I'm done being in your shadow." I felt a surge of anger, a desire to lash out, but I held back, refusing to give her the satisfaction. "You're pathetic," I spat, turning to leave. "You've destroyed our friendship, and for what? To make yourself feel better. Enjoy your empty victory, Chloe, because I'm done with you." I walked away, my heart pounding, vowing to cut her out of my life for good. Leaving Chloe's apartment, I felt a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. My best friend had betrayed me, and my boyfriend wouldn't speak to me. I was alone, left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I tried to reach out to Ryan again, desperate to make him understand. I sent him a long email, explaining everything, telling him the truth about Chloe's so-called prank. I poured my heart out, hoping he'd at least read it. But days passed with no response. I felt like I was drowning, caught in a storm of betrayal and heartache with no way out. One night, out of pure desperation, I decided to call Ryan from a friend's phone, hoping he'd answer if he didn't recognize the number. To my surprise, he picked up. "Ryan, please, it's me, Emily. Just hear me out." There was a long pause before he finally responded, his voice cold and distant. "What do you want, Emily?" My heart raced as I tried to explain, telling him about Chloe's sabotage, about the fake messages. But he cut me off, his tone filled with bitterness. "So now you're blaming Chloe. Grow up, Emily. Take some responsibility for once." His words stung, and I realized he wasn't going to believe me. Feeling defeated, I hung up the phone, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't believe this was happening. My entire world had been turned upside down, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. I knew I had to move on, but the pain was overwhelming. I decided to block Chloe, to cut her out of my life completely. I deleted every photo, every message, every reminder of our friendship. It hurt, but I knew it was the only way I could start to heal. I couldn't let her toxic presence linger in my life any longer. As I tried to rebuild my life, I began to hear more rumors. People told me Chloe was bragging about what she'd done, laughing about how she'd taught me a lesson. It was humiliating, knowing she was reveling in my pain, that she'd turned my heartache into some sick form of entertainment. But as the weeks passed, I also started to hear whispers about Chloe's own life falling apart. Apparently, her behavior hadn't gone unnoticed, and people were beginning to distance themselves from her. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of satisfaction, knowing that karma was finally catching up to her. One day, I ran into a mutual friend, someone who had seen Chloe's true colors, and cut ties with her as well. She told me that Chloe had tried to sabotage other relationships too, that I wasn't the first victim of her twisted games. I felt a strange sense of relief, knowing that I wasn't alone, that Chloe's behavior wasn't a reflection of me. She was a deeply troubled person, someone who thrived on chaos and manipulation. I realized then that I was better off without her, that losing her as a friend was the best thing that could have happened to me. As the months passed, I slowly started to rebuild my life. I focused on my job, my hobbies, and reconnecting with old friends. I was determined not to let Chloe's betrayal define me, not to let her twisted games break me. I knew I would never be the same, but I also knew I was stronger than I'd ever realized. I'd survived the worst kind of betrayal, and I was still standing. I was determined to move forward, to create a life that was filled with genuine connections and people who truly cared about me. One afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. My heart raced as I opened it, wondering if it could be from Ryan. But instead, it was Chloe. "Hey Em, can we talk?" I stared at the message, feeling a surge of anger. After everything she'd done, she had the nerve to reach out to me, as if we could just pick up where we left off. I deleted the message without responding, refusing to let her back into my life. She was poison, and I was done letting her infect my world. I deserved better, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down again. Not long after, I heard from mutual friends that Chloe had tried to reach out to Ryan as well, attempting to clear the air. They told me she'd spun a new story, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. But Ryan wasn't interested. He had cut ties with both of us, choosing to move on from the drama. I felt a pang of sadness, knowing I'd lost him for good, but I also felt a sense of closure. Chloe's lies had driven us apart, but I wasn't going to let her haunt me anymore. I was ready to move forward, with or without Ryan. As I focused on healing, I began to rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten about. I threw myself into painting, something I'd always loved but had neglected over the years. I found solace in the colors, in the way the brush moved across the canvas. It was therapeutic, a way for me to channel my pain into something beautiful. I realized then that I didn't need Chloe or Ryan to be happy. I was strong enough to create my own happiness, to build a life that was filled with passion and purpose. I was finally beginning to feel whole again. Months later, I found myself at a party, surrounded by friends who had stuck by me through everything. As I laughed and danced, I realized how far I'd come. I no longer felt the weight of Chloe's betrayal or the ache of losing Ryan. I was free, unburdened by the toxic influences that had once dragged me down. I had rebuilt my life, created a circle of people who truly cared about me. I was grateful for the pain, for the lessons it had taught me. I knew now that I was stronger, that I could survive anything. I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. At that same party, a mutual friend mentioned that Chloe was there too, lurking in the corner, watching me with a strange expression. I caught her eye from across the room, and for a moment, our gazes locked. She looked different, tired, worn down, almost as if the weight of her actions had finally caught up to her. I felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that she was facing the consequences of her choices. I turned away, refusing to let her presence affect me. I was done with her, done with the games and the drama. She no longer had any power over me, and it felt liberating. As I left the party, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. I had risen above her betrayal, had reclaimed my life, and she was still trapped in the mess she had created. I knew then that I had won, that I had emerged from this ordeal stronger and wiser. Chloe had tried to tear me down, to break me, but she had only made me more resilient. I walked away with my head held high, determined to continue building a life that was free from toxic people and toxic relationships. I was done looking back, done letting the past hold me captive. In the months that followed, I rarely thought about Chloe or Ryan. I had moved on, focusing on my own happiness, my own journey. I began dating again, cautiously opening myself up to new possibilities. I met people who valued me, who saw my worth, and I realized just how much I had been missing. I was no longer defined by the pain of the past, no longer haunted by Chloe's betrayal. I had found a sense of peace, a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. I knew I would never be the same, but I also knew I was better for it. One day, as I was scrolling through social media, I stumbled across a post from Chloe. She was ranting about being betrayed by her own friends, about how everyone had turned against her. I felt a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. She had dug her own grave, and now she was reaping the consequences. I knew I could have reached out, could have tried to mend fences, but I didn't feel any urge to do so. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I wasn't going to let her back into my life, wasn't going to let her drag me down again. As I continued to scroll, I noticed comments from people calling her out, telling her that she had no one to blame but herself. I realized then that I wasn't the only one who had seen through her lies, that others had finally started to recognize her for who she truly was. It was a relief, knowing that I wasn't alone in this, that others understood the depth of her manipulation. I felt a sense of closure, a sense of peace. I had moved on, and now it was her turn to face the consequences of her actions. I was free, and I wasn't looking back. In the months that followed, I threw myself into new hobbies, exploring interests I had long neglected. I started hiking, painting, and even took up yoga. I found joy in the little things, in the simple pleasures of everyday life. I was creating a life that was filled with love, with laughter, with genuine connections. I knew I had a long way to go, but I was ready for the journey. I was no longer defined by the pain of the past, no longer haunted by Chloe's betrayal. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever been. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend who had known both Chloe and me for years. We talked about everything that had happened, and he told me that Chloe had been trying to repair her reputation, reaching out to people she'd hurt in the past. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I knew I couldn't let her back into my life. She had shown me who she was, and I believed her. I wished her well, but I also knew that I needed to protect myself, to surround myself with people who genuinely cared about me. I had moved on, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into the darkness. As the years went by, I continued to build a life that was filled with happiness, with love, with purpose. I made new friends, traveled to new places, and embraced every opportunity that came my way. I was no longer defined by the pain of the past, no longer haunted by Chloe's betrayal. I had found a sense of peace, a sense of joy that was entirely my own. I knew I would never be the same, but I also knew that I was better for it. I had survived, had risen above the darkness, and I was ready for whatever the future held. Then one day, I received a message from Ryan. He apologized, explaining that he had finally realized the truth, that he understood what Chloe had done. He told me he was sorry for not believing me, for not giving me a chance to explain. I felt a surge of emotions, relief, anger, sadness, but mostly I felt closure. I didn't need his apology, didn't need his validation. I had moved on, had built a life that was free from the pain of the past. I wished him well, but I knew I couldn't go back. I had grown, had changed, and I was ready to continue forward on my own path. As I read his message, I felt a sense of gratitude for everything I had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the heartache, it had all shaped me, had all made me stronger. I knew I would never be the same, but I also knew that I was better for it. I had found a sense of peace, a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of others, no longer haunted by the darkness of the past. I had reclaimed my life, had built a future that was filled with hope, with love, with endless possibilities. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I reflected on how far I had come. I was no longer the naive girl who had blindly trusted her best friend, who had let others define her happiness. I had grown, had learned to trust myself, to believe in my own strength. I was free from the chains of the past, free to live my life on my own terms. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was ready for them. I had survived, had risen above the darkness, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. Over time, I found myself thinking of Chloe and Ryan less and less. They had been important chapters in my life, but I had turned the page, had moved on to a new story. I was building a life that was filled with love, with laughter, with genuine connections. I knew that I was stronger now, more resilient, more determined to create a future that was entirely my own. I had faced the darkness, had overcome the pain, and I was ready for whatever came next. I was free, and I wasn't going to let anything hold me back. Then one day, I received an unexpected message from Chloe. She apologized, claiming she had changed, that she had finally understood the damage she had done. She asked if we could meet, if we could try to rebuild our friendship. I read her words, feeling a strange mix of emotions, anger, pity, sadness, but mostly I felt indifference. I had moved on, had built a life that was free from her toxicity. I wished her well, but I knew I couldn't go back. She had shown me who she was, and I believed her. I wasn't going to let her back into my life, wasn't going to let her poison my world again. As I sat there, reading her message, I realized just how far I had come. I was no longer defined by the pain of the past, no longer haunted by the darkness that had once threatened to consume me. I had found a sense of peace, a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. I had reclaimed my life, had built a future that was filled with hope, with love, with endless possibilities. I was free, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I had survived, had risen above the darkness, and I was ready for whatever came next. Looking back, I realized that Chloe's betrayal had been a blessing in disguise. It had forced me to confront my own strength, to discover my own resilience. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal, and I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, more determined than ever. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of others, no longer haunted by the darkness of the past. I was free to live my life on my own terms, to create a future that was filled with hope, with love, with endless possibilities. I was ready for whatever came next, and I wasn't going to let anything hold me back. As the years went by, I continued to build a life that was filled with happiness, with love, with genuine connections. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, who valued me for who I was. I knew that I was stronger now, more resilient, more determined to create a future that was entirely my own. I had faced the darkness, had overcome the pain, and I was ready for whatever came next. I was free, and I wasn't going to let anything hold me back. I had reclaimed my life, and I was finally at peace. Then one day I ran into Chloe by chance. She looked different, older, more tired, as if the weight of her actions had finally caught up to her. She tried to strike up a conversation, but I gave her a polite nod and continued on my way. I had nothing to say to her, nothing to share. I had moved on, had built a life that was filled with love, with happiness, with genuine connections. I wasn't going to let her drag me back into the darkness, wasn't going to let her poison my world again. I was free, and I wasn't looking back. As I walked away from Chloe, I felt a sense of closure, a feeling of peace that I had never known before. I knew that I had a long road ahead, that there would still be challenges, but I also knew that I was ready for them. I had reclaimed my life, had built a future that was filled with hope, with love, with endless possibilities. I was free from the chains of the past, free to live my life on my own terms. I had survived, had risen above the darkness, and I was ready for whatever the future held. I was finally at peace. As I continued on my journey, I realized just how much I had grown, how far I had come. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of others, no longer haunted by the darkness that had once threatened to consume me. I had found a sense of peace, a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. I had reclaimed my life, had built a future that was filled with hope, with love, with endless possibilities. I was free, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I was finally whole, finally at peace, and I was ready for whatever came next. Looking back, I realized that I had found happiness on my own, had built a life that was filled with hope and possibility. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of the past, no longer haunted by the pain that had once consumed me. I had found a sense of peace, a sense of joy that was entirely my own. I was free to live my life on my own terms, free to create a future that was filled with love, with happiness, with endless possibilities. I was finally at peace, finally whole, and I knew that the best was yet to come.